in and out of the Beltway. From large cities to small towns to the rural heartland. From sea to shining sea. This is Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio. Inside the News.
Welcome back to this week's edition of Inside the News. Glad to have you with us. And this is the week before the election, and so much is going on. We're glad that all of you across the country are listening in, whether it's the radio affiliates across the country, or if you're listening to us on auntv.com or YouTube. Ben Brunson, he's in the bottom middle. How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing just great, Guy. It is a pleasure once again to be with you and Frank.
Frank, how you doing up there? And what state are you in this week?
We are in the decayed state of New York.
I absolutely love it. And people are probably wondering what's going on here because I have the trees. And actually, Hallmark beat me by a week because they started putting Christmas movies out last weekend. Did you guys notice that?
Yeah, I noticed they've come up with a brand new plot where a woman goes to a small Christmassy town and salvages some rich guy.
And the movie ain't over. It isn't over until they kiss. Have you ever noticed that? Well, I can tell you.
But there is something interesting in that, though. The fact that they get such enormous ratings is indicative of America's desire for normal values, and it really tells you where the people are at. As the networks are basically talking about, there's a gay plot in every news show that comes on. I think it shows America really wants traditional values, and that's, I think, what the success of the Hallmark movies are all about.
Yeah, and we'll talk more about that right now in this segment because, boy, oh boy, you teed it up perfectly, Frank, because we're going to be talking about the election, and there's so much more on that. But yet COVID is starting to creep its way back. It seems like the upper Midwest, which was pretty much immune from the early ones, when we saw it back in March, it looks like they're starting to get a strike here, and people want normal, Frank.
They do, and the country needs normal. Look, if we follow Dr. Fauci's advice, not one of us would ever get into our cars and get on the highway because as long as there's a single death, Dr. Fauci would not want us to drive. There is a misconception that you can shut down a nation and then just bring it right back up, like turning on and off a light bulb. That is not accurate. We are seeing more and more small businesses close up their doors for good, not only because of what happened before with the shutdown, but because of anticipation that the country might be shut down again. This economy cannot withstand another shutdown, despite what Joe Biden and the Democrats want us to do. Another shutdown would destroy this economy and set us back a decade or more.
Frank has made a good point, and Ben, you're our resident economist on the program here, and he made a good point. You just can't flip the switch and on it goes and off it goes. I mean, you can flip the off it goes because you can totally shut down everything, but the on it goes, it takes a while.
Well, we've already gone through the shutdown period. It lasted far longer than it should have. We did it out of an abundance of caution because there was a great deal of lack of knowledge regarding COVID-19 and its impact and its true case fatality rate. We have gained tremendous knowledge since then, as well as making great strides in the advancement of therapeutic drugs and procedures. And we are very close to having one or more operating vaccines, functional vaccines. It would be folly, the height of folly, to go in the direction of locking down the economy. And yet, as Frank and you have said, Guy, the prevailing mood among the left and the Fauci world is, gee, we need another lockdown right now. We need to follow Europe back into the abyss of economic collapse and chaos. This week started with the stock market selling off very sharply, over 800 points the first trading day this week. And it made no sense to me, except I turned on the left stream media and they're on an all-out push to sow panic and chaos that we have a resurging COVID-19 infection rate in this country, and we're going to head back into lockdown. And the market was reacting that, and it is clearly an attempt by the left stream media to sew up this election for Joe Biden in the last days.
Well, the definition of abyss, and you nailed this well, it's called a deep or seemingly bottomless chasm. And Frank, that's where believe it or not, that's where the left wants us to go. And they are so anti-American, so anti-freedom, so anti-people. This is unbelievable, isn't it, Frank?
Well, I'm going to talk about this in my one more thing at the end of the show, but Barack Obama promised to fundamentally transform America, and destroying the economy and then rebuilding it in a socialist mode is precisely what they have in mind. COVID was simply another great opportunity for them to extend that idea, to do that with the consent of the American people. As we go forward, we're going to have to see whether the people are going to be willing to literally destroy small business in the United States in the name of another COVID fear. One of the things that the left has gone crazy about is when the president became a victim of COVID and then recovered and went right back to work. That seemed to be a finger in their eye. The fact that we're all going to die, the fact that the minute you get COVID, you are dead, as though this was the bubonic plague of the Middle Ages, fell out the window in terms of publicity at that point. They are deeply disappointed that the president recovered for more reasons than one, of course. But that's where we have to understand this, what we have to understand that this is all about. This is a problem. This is a disease. We will catch it like the flu and recover from it like the flu.
This is Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio inside the news. Glad to have you with us. Ben, the bubonic plague, as Frank brought up, and so much has gone on in the last, 1,000 years or so since that came around. And the fact is we have drugs like Regeneron. We have these therapeutics. You are well familiar with medical testings and things of this nature. We are so even from the Spanish flu 100 years ago, we're far more advanced, aren't we, Ben?
Yes, fortunately, science and medical technology is, as everyone knows, greatly advanced. We've had a tremendous century of progress scientifically, and it is paying dividends in terms of extended lifetimes and generally, for most people, healthier lifestyle over time. The ability to address chronic diseases that were at a minimum debilitating just 50 to 100 years ago. And now most people can live with chronic illnesses and have a decent quality of life well into their advanced years. So we've come a long way, and yet when you look at this and the reaction to this, it's very clear. I've been slow to pick up on this, but it's very clear that you have a large segment of the country that does view this as a death sentence if they get it. And you have to wonder about the popularity of movies like World War Z and all of these end of the world, I Am Legend zombie movies. And a lot of people conflating this COVID-19 with that type of scenario where the world has come to an end and life as we know it is permanently changed. The reality is totally different. The reality is COVID-19 is essentially like the flu, but it is a strain of the flu for which we had no built up natural antibodies and defenses when it emerged on the scene. That is the primary reason it is so contagious. And yet, as we go forward, we are building those antibodies throughout the body of the country as a whole. And we know now that, as we've said for a long time, that for young people, this is not an issue any different than the flu. We should allow it, frankly, to spread freely among young people, because that's the way to herd immunity, along with a vaccination program. And we have to protect the elderly. That has been the Florida policy and strategy under Ron DeSantis, is why Florida has less than 1/10 of the death toll from this that New York has, despite having not only a larger population in general, but a larger elderly population than New York has.
Frank, I'm going to reference a Geico commercial where they've got these four kids out there and they're like in a horror movie and everything, and they're trying to run away from the bad guy. And the gal says, well, why don't we go into the running car? They said, no, let's hide behind the chainsaws. And they said, when you're in a horror movie, you make bad decisions. Well, when you're Governor Cuomo of New York, you make bad decisions and you cause people to die in nursing homes. Exactly what Ben was talking about, that DeSantis is letting it kind of run its course. I was talking with my brothers over the weekend, and with the vaccine, the more people, I think we've all gotten maybe a little bit of a strain of it anyways in our system, and we're starting to build up these immunities. We might not have full blown, but we've all, I mean, it's out there, Frank, and the more we build up these immunities, the stronger we're going to be as a nation.
Well, you brought up Governor Cuomo, which opens an interesting door, which tells you the use that this COVID has had to the Democratic Party. Governor Cuomo had the benefit of the USS Comfort docked in New York Harbor and also the Javits Convention Center, both, of course, supplied by President Trump and the federal government. It was the decision of Governor Cuomo, rather than to give, I guess he thought, a prop or a laudatory comment towards the White House, rather decided to take COVID patients and put them in nursing homes. This way, not to take advantage of federal largesse. That resulted, of course, in the death of thousands of New York elderly. It's perhaps the greatest mass murder in the history of New York State. The media has decided to essentially overlook that horrible decision done for purely political reasons and not make an issue of it whatsoever. If there was ever a case of the media attempting to cover up a crime by someone they happen to agree with politically, this was it.
That was a pretty bold statement by Frank there, Ben, with the greatest mass murder. But there's some point to that, because those nursing home people, they did not ask to go back into the danger zone, did they? It's kind of like that movie that we were just referencing.
Yeah, it was certainly the greatest folly yet in terms of this pandemic in the United States and the reaction to it. There were so many resources available, from the federal resources to the tent city that was set up in Central Park by Samaritan's Purse, free of, that was just done by a very large charity, a Christian charity. And yet it was not utilized. None of these resources were utilized, and a very bad decision. And at the identical time, just to beat a dead horse here, Ron DeSantis was publicly making the opposite policy decisions, where he went on TV in Florida and said, look, the number one issue is protecting the elderly in this country.
Yes.
And he issued an order that anyone diagnosed with COVID-19 must be removed from their retirement community to convalesce somewhere else. And that saved thousands and thousands of lives in Florida. And it's a very simple, obvious choice. For some reason, Cuomo couldn't make it. And I think Governor Murphy essentially followed Cuomo's lead in New Jersey, and the same impact resulted there.
All right, we have 2 minutes left here, Frank, and I just got a note from my children up in the Akron area of Ohio, and APS, Akron Public Schools, they're now going back to all remote learning, and they're shutting down the in-person stuff. People want to get back to normal, but the Dems don't.
No, they don't, because a sense of crisis is what a totalitarian movement likes to create in order to gain power. This would be terrible unless you vote for us, unless you put us in, and we'll take care of it all. Going into the election, you're going to see more and more for the remaining week or so of impulse to close down schools, close down the economy, and then miraculously, if they win on November 3rd, the economy will start to open up and things will improve, and you're going to see a lot less doom and gloom stated by the media.
Man, isn't that the playbook? You create the crisis. You're the ones creating the crisis, and then people come to you to get you out of the crisis.
Well, look, let's go back to schools, because your point on Akron is so on topic right now. There are other ways to do this. Kids are safe from this. They can suffer through this, and it's really a non-issue for children. They need to be back in school. The return of public schools is a huge step towards normalcy. You can accommodate teachers. A lot of teachers are young and healthy, they'll be fine. If teachers are older or they have chronic issues, they can be accommodated. The teacher could teach remotely into a classroom that has kids in it. For instance, you can flip the script from what is being done, all these Zoom classes that are all remote. Have the teacher teach remotely. That's the same thing that's happening on Zoom anyway, with the kids in the classroom. So there are ways to be creative to bring back our economy and still protect those who feel they're at risk or vulnerable. I go back to Joe Biden making the statement that basically Trump doesn't care about teachers who might die.
All right. I had a professor, Dr. Popplestone, and he did everything remote. And that was 45 years ago. I hated it. It was terrible. All right. Now it's 45 years ago without the pandemic. We've got to take a break. We've got Armenia. We've got some wars going on. What about the nuclear stuff and the election? All coming up. Stay with us.
You're listening to Wehman, Brunson, and Vernuccio, Inside the News.